Can someone get us coffee? Derek barked across the conference room without looking up from his overpriced tablet, his fingers swiping aggressively across a screen of meaningless metrics. He meant me. Of course he did. I was seated at the corner table like some forgotten potted plant, the quiet woman in the unassuming blouse and reading glasses. He didn't know my name. He didn't care to ask. He just assumed that the woman not speaking, the one sitting with her legs crossed and her pen poised over a notebook, must be there to fetch caffeine and smile politely at the alpha peacock swinging his PowerPoint decks around like broadswords. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. I just sat there, my expression unmoving, letting the fool keep guessing. Before we dive deeper into how I dismantled this man's entire career, let me know in the comments, what city or country are you watching this from? I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Letting people underestimate me has been my job for the past 4 years. I've been watching, listening, and smiling when appropriate, taking mental notes with the precision of a forensic accountant. They think I'm harmless. They think I'm done. To them, I am the retired old guard, a relic from the founding days who has been graciously allowed to linger like a janitor who knows the Wi-Fi password. That's how Alan likes it. That's how he designed it. Take a step back, Denise, Alan had said to me after my surgery 3 years ago, his voice dripping with that faux concern that CEOs learn in seminars. Let the new blood do the dance while you rest. Right. Rest. I built this company with a laptop that overheated if you looked at it wrong, a broken marriage, and 2 maxed-out credit cards. I remember nights where I slept under my desk because I couldn't afford the gas to drive home and back. But sure, I'll sit quietly and rest while the clowns juggle flaming investor money. And then there was Derek. He strutted in 6 weeks ago like a rooster let loose in a mirror factory. Chest puffed, teeth bleached a shade of white that doesn't exist in nature, and a belt buckle shiny enough to deflect shame. He was another consultant with a buzzword addiction and a 6-figure retainer. Alan introduced him like he was the second coming of Steve Jobs. He's going to help us scale, Alan had beamed, sweating slightly in his Italian suit. He's cleaned up 24 companies before us. Cleaned up, huh? I checked. I did the due diligence Alan was too lazy to do. One of those companies went bankrupt within 6 months of Derek's departure. 2 were sued for fraudulent reporting. 1 turned into a crypto MLM scam with a podcast. But sure, let's hand him the wheel of the ship I built. They think I'm not watching, but I see it all. I saw Derek's proposal to streamline the legacy footprint, corporate speak for firing people over 40, which somehow bypassed the board. I saw Alan authorize a reallocation of stock options without a vote. A hiring freeze was implemented, and I only found out when the new receptionist I personally referred was told the position was canceled. Not by HR, but by Derek through a Slack message. I guess that's how executive decisions get made now, via emoji and vibes. The funny thing about being underestimated is that it's like hiding in plain sight. You stop existing in their reality, which means you can move through it like a ghost. The interns talk openly in front of me. I've heard everything from insider gossip to which client accounts Derek wants to quietly sunset to make the books look prettier for a potential sale. The old shareholders are just noise, Derek said last Tuesday over lunch, holding a fork full of overpriced seaweed salad while I sat 3 tables away. We clean the cap table, rebrand, take it public, and poof, none of this founder baggage matters. Poof, huh? Cute word. Fluffy. Like the look on his face is going to be when he realizes the baggage holds 60% of the company's equity through a blind trust he's too lazy to trace. I never sold my shares. I never even diluted them. I let them believe I stepped back because I was tired. But no, what I got tired of was watching egos wreck, the thing I built from scratch, being paraded around by men grinning like they invented sliced bread. I'm done watching. I've been playing checkers on my chessboard, and I just moved my queen. The real kicker is Alan. My former mentee, my hand-picked successor, the man who once sent me flowers on Founders Day and called me his business mother. He has started avoiding eye contact in the hallway. His handshake has gotten softer, clammy. He's sweating through meetings even when the AC is blasting. He knows, on some primal level. I think he knows the floor is about to fall out. But Derek? Derek is still strutting. He's still printing color-coded org charts like they are sacred scrolls, still patting Alan on the back like a frat bro at a homecoming game. He doesn't see it coming. He doesn't know that I've already called my lawyer. He doesn't know that I've already begun updating the board. I'm no longer just watching. I'm counting down. 3 moves left. 2 meetings. 1 summit. Then the silence ends and I speak. Derek's first official team meeting was like watching a car crash choreographed by a theater major with a marketing degree. He rolled into the conference room in a slim-fit suit that looked like it had been vacuum-sealed onto his body, holding a designer notebook no one ever saw him write in. "Let's disrupt the status quo," he said, clapping his hands together like we were at a TED Talk instead of a quarterly performance review. He pulled up a slide titled Refactoring the Core Team, as if he'd spent more than 9 minutes learning our org chart. He pointed at names, boxes, arrows. He moved entire departments around like Monopoly properties. No context, no history, just colors and acronyms. Then he turned toward me. I was standing right next to the whiteboard, holding the markers he had demanded. He looked at me with that frat boy smirk and said it. "And of course, Alan's longtime assistant will continue helping with meeting logistics and calendar hygiene." Calendar hygiene. The room went still for half a breath. It was just long enough for every executive present to register the insult and decide whether to react. These were people I had hired. People I had given bonuses to from my own pocket in the early days. Alan glanced my way, brief, mechanical, but said nothing. Not a word. He stared at the floor tiles like they were suddenly the most fascinating things on earth. Derek was already moving on, talking about ROI synergies and lean reinvention, probably inventing phrases as he went. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I simply wrote 1 word on my notepad. Witnessed. Humiliation is a strange thing. It doesn't always arrive with yelling or tears. Sometimes it shows up like static in your spine. A faint buzz just under the skin. You feel it in your jaw locked tight so the scream doesn't slip out. You feel it behind your eyes where you refuse to let the moisture win. But I've learned over time that rage is a tool, and tools don't work when you're swinging them blind. So I smiled. I nodded. I even jotted something down like a good little assistant. Then I went back to my office, closed the door, turned the blinds, and called Mitchell, my lawyer of 12 years. "Activate the contingency binder," I said. "Didn't ask which one?" Mitchell replied instantly. He knew. "You want me to draft the full resolution?" he asked, the sound of keyboard clacking already audible in the background. "Yes." The board one. "And dig up the founder clause." There was a pause on the line, then a soft whistle. "It's go time." I looked out the window, watching Derek walk across the parking lot with his sunglasses on at dusk, looking like a budget movie star. "It's almost time," I said. "But we're going to let the fish get comfortable in the tank first." The founder clause was buried in a 6-year-old board document. A clause Alan had forgotten all about because I'd made sure he would back then. He was still humble, still hungry in those days. He signed anything I put in front of him, eyes full of trust. One of those things gave me the right to override executive leadership in a crisis, provided I had backing from 2 legacy investors. I already had 3 in my phone favorites. Derek was the match. Alan had doused the floor in gasoline over the past 2 years. And now? Now I was holding the lighter. But first, I needed to know how deep the rot went. Over the next week, I played the role to perfection. I brought coffee to 2 meetings. I emailed calendar invites like a good little admin. I even complimented Derek's strategic alignment memo to his face, which he'd clearly had an AI write because it included the phrase fungible innovation stack 3 times in 1 paragraph. But while I played secretary, I was also playing spy. I pulled access logs. I reviewed Slack threads. I started cross-referencing vendor contracts and found 2 that had been rerouted through shell agencies linked to Derek's college buddy, a guy who sells culture transformation retreats in the Berkshires. I printed it all, highlighted it, filed it in the folder labeled QS, Quiet Internal Sabotage. By Thursday, Derek had begun referring to me as Miss Denise in meetings, using a tone you'd reserve for an elderly aunt handing out lemon cookies, not the woman who wrote the check that kept the lights on in 2018. Alan never corrected him. He changed too. The Alan I mentored would have been mortified. This version, the glossy, brand-polished CEO who practiced his signature for investor letters, was either scared or complicit. Maybe both. That night, I poured a glass of Malbec, opened my laptop, and began composing a letter to the 3 original investors. The subject line was simple: a situation you should be aware of. The attachment was 47 pages long. The last slide said, proposed leadership realignment. I didn't need to warn Derek. He wouldn't see it coming, even if I spelled it out in Comic Sans and stapled it to his forehead. Before the glass office and the marble reception desk, before the interns with ring lights and job titles like Brand Synergy Architect, it was just me and a broken air conditioner in a strip mall co-working space. The company back then didn't even have a name that stuck. Just a buggy prototype app built by 2 caffeine-addled Stanford dropouts who couldn't balance a checkbook but swore they'd change the world. They pitched me on a napkin during a networking event. Everyone else walked away after 10 minutes. I stayed for an hour. Not because the idea was brilliant, it wasn't. It barely worked. But the problem they wanted to solve? That was real. And I knew if someone older, meaner, and far more stubborn got behind the wheel, it could become something. So I wrote a check. Not a big one, just enough to cover server costs, ramen, and their rent for 3 months. They offered me 10% equity. I said I wanted 40%. They laughed. I said, "You want the check or not?" They handed over the paperwork so fast I barely finished my wine. 3 years later, one of them had vanished into a polyamorous commune in Oregon. The other was threatening to sell the IP to a competitor because he wanted a Tesla. And me? I was still there. Still grinding. Still wiring money at 3 a.m. when the backend caught fire and we were 3 days from missing payroll. I quietly bought out the one who disappeared. The second one I let him sell, but I controlled the buyer. By the time Alan entered the picture, the bones were solid. He had polish. He had confidence. He spoke MBA language fluently and could smile while saying absolutely nothing, which is more useful in fundraising than anyone admits. I made him COO, coached him, protected him from his own ego. When I needed surgery and had to step back, I gave him the reins, but never the keys to the vault. That's when I created the blind trust. 60% of the company's equity buried behind shell structures and legacy legal documents even the board didn't fully understand. I didn't want my name in headlines. I didn't want another tech matriarch sob story on the cover of Forbes. I wanted control without attention. I wanted the power to disappear, but only until I needed to reappear. Then came the state infrastructure deal. Our competitor had stronger code, a slicker demo, and deeper lobbying connections. But I had something they didn't: patience and a fake name. Margaret Ellis. That was the alias. I filed the paperwork, sent the RFP under an advisory firm I created in Delaware, and made the pitch myself. Gray wig, voice modulator, the whole 9 yards. Don't laugh, it worked. The Department of Transportation signed a 3-year contract worth $28 million with Ellis Consulting. A month later, Ellis Consulting transferred the service component to us, my company. Clean, legal, untraceable unless you had the clearance to see through the filings. Alan called it a miracle. I called it Tuesday. I should have known even then that his gratitude had an expiration date. When the money rolled in, so did the vultures. Consultants, advisors, strategic partners who'd never held a wrench or solved a deployment problem suddenly floated around like they'd always been here. Derek was just the newest in a long line of snakes. But at least his venom came with neon charts and sponsored LinkedIn posts. Now I was watching them circle the kill while the body still had a pulse and a knife in hand. I called Mitchell again the following morning. "Draft the board resolution," I said. "You want to initiate the clause?" he asked, already typing. "Not yet," I said. "Just prepare the packet and add the investor endorsements. I'll get the signatures." And Alan. I looked at the framed photo on my shelf. Me and Alan from the early days, grinning like idiots in front of a banner that said we made it in Comic Sans. Alan finds out with everyone else. It started with a meeting that I was never supposed to know about. No calendar invite, no hallway whispers, not even a slipped agenda item. Just a suspiciously locked conference room and the unmistakable scent of 2 expensive colognes wafting down the hallway like a warning shot. Derek was inside, of course, holding court like the undercooked Gordon Gekko he thought he was. Alan sat to his right. A few mid-level VPs rounded out the table, people with just enough stock to be dangerous, but not enough memory to be loyal. I wouldn't have known it was happening if it weren't for Jasmine. Jasmine used to be my intern back when her biggest crisis was figuring out how to politely decline a lunch invite from the creepy marketing director. I taught her how to write emails that sounded like velvet but cut like razors. She's the receptionist now. Smart, steady, sharper than most of the execs walking past her desk pretending she doesn't exist. She texted me mid-meeting. 2 words, Derek's purging. I walked past the glass wall like I was heading to the copy room. I didn't slow down, didn't even look, but I counted faces. I took note of who was laughing too loud, who was nodding too fast. Derek had brought printouts, thick, glossy ones with charts. I knew the look. This wasn't a brainstorm. It was an execution plan. I waited until after hours. Then I pulled the janitor's spare badge and let myself in. Jasmine had accidentally on purpose left a copy of the packet on the console table by the door. I took it. The title, Operational Realignment, Efficiency Road V1.4. I read it on the floor of my living room with a glass of bourbon and a pencil clenched between my teeth. It wasn't just insulting, it was surgical. Derek had outlined a phased streamlining plan that conveniently eliminated anyone connected to the original funding rounds. Me, the legacy board observers, and 3 advisory positions I personally created to keep early values intact. He even included a PR blurb, fresh leadership, future-facing vision. I laughed out loud at that one. Future-facing. The man hadn't faced a real challenge in his life. He just assumed everyone before him was a speed bump. Buried on page 9 was the worst part, a hostile buyout mechanism. Using investor fatigue and reputation management as leverage, he planned to approach the minor shareholders, purchase enough of their scraps to bluff majority influence, and then push through a new stock class that would dilute any dormant controlling interests. Translation: erasing me. The problem was, the interests he assumed were dormant weren't. They were buried, silent, strategically camouflaged. Derek didn't see camouflage. He saw empty chairs and smelled blood. I texted Mitchell. Me, efficiency proposal confirmed. Mitchell, summit is in 3 weeks. Alan moved it up. Mitchell, you want to play it quiet or loud? I stared at the document's final page. Phase 3. Rebrand legacy stakeholders as if we were barnacles to be scraped off the hull before launch. Asterisk me, let's start quiet. But bring the big folder, asterisk. The big folder wasn't a metaphor. It was a real leather-bound binder, thick as a law school textbook, filled with everything from the original shareholder agreements to forensic accounting logs. It lived in Mitchell's fireproof cabinet and had one rule: only open when war is declared. I wasn't there yet, but the border had been crossed. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat in the kitchen, waiting. Derek strolled in eventually, sunglasses hooked on his collar, sipping something green and overpriced. He looked surprised to see me. "Early bird," he said, chuckling like a man who'd never been hit in the face with a subpoena. I smiled back. "Just checking on the coffee filters." His smirk wavered for half a second. Then he was gone. But I wasn't smiling when he left. In fact, I didn't smile again for the rest of the day. Not even when Jasmine slipped me another note. This one just one word. Summit. Date, time, location. The war room had been booked. The invitations sent. They didn't know I'd already rewritten the ending. I invited Alan for coffee the way you'd invite a neighbor over before demolishing their house. Smiling, casual, no need for alarm. He picked the place, of course. Some rooftop patio with glass railings and almond milk everything, where the employees wore lanyards like necklaces and the chairs were made from recycled gilt. He showed up 10 minutes late, already typing something on his phone, already apologizing with that polished, rehearsed charm he used when spinning layoffs into strategic evolution. "Denise," he said, sliding into the seat across from me, still not looking up. I'm glad you reached out. We don't do this enough. Just you and me, off the clock. I sipped my coffee, burned my tongue a little on purpose to stay sharp. Yeah, just us. He talked first, of course. That's how Alan works. Fill the silence before it starts asking questions. He spoke in the very language of someone who's forgotten what it's like to build something with their hands. Every sentence was a word cloud: growth mindset, strategic scale, capital velocity. He used the word synergy 3 times before the waitress even brought my toast. And then, somewhere between him explaining our market posture and complimenting Derek's vision clarity, he slipped. You know, he said, stirring his coffee like it owed him money, once we're public, no one remembers founders anyway. It's all about the team now. The current narrative. He said it like it was nothing. Like it was the weather. Like I hadn't been his narrative for a decade. I watched him for a moment, let it sink in. He didn't notice. I nodded, of course. He smiled, relieved. That was the moment he let himself believe I was truly out of the picture. That I was just another legacy voice, a polite nod in the company timeline, to be honored in a LinkedIn post and forgotten by Q2. I didn't argue. I didn't ask follow-ups. I just thanked him for the coffee, stood up and left him there, stirring ashes into overpriced caffeine. Back at my office, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark for a while. I let the feeling settle. Not rage, not even grief. Just a deep, hollow clarity, like finding a key you didn't know was missing. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the summit file. The Investor Summit, originally designed as a formality, a champagne-slicked slideshow of inflated numbers and empty promises, was under my jurisdiction. According to the bylaws, which Alan never bothered to reread, the founder shares came with one overlooked perk: agenda authority. I couldn't cancel the summit, but I could rewrite the script. So I did. I logged into the internal planning portal and quietly revised the schedule. I replaced Derek's hour-long vision for Q3 with a single 15-minute block labeled Special Executive Review. I removed 2 consultant panels and inserted a board resolution presentation in their place. I added 2 names to the guest list, both early investors, both legally recognized as voting authorities. Then I locked the file with my override key and marked it as final. By the time the administrative assistant opened it the next day to print the handouts, there would be no time to argue. No room to change course. Alan had always been a performer, a good one at that. Slick, charming, photogenic in a way that made VC firms salivate. But today I saw the crack. The chip in the veneer. He was playing CEO in a suit someone else paid for. And I finally realized he wasn't afraid of being betrayed. He was afraid of being irrelevant. And that fear? That was going to be the hook I used to drag him off the stage. The first investor I called was Glenn Mallory. Glenn doesn't do LinkedIn. He doesn't do press. He doesn't do anything unless there's a bottle of rye on the table and your pitch has fewer buzzwords than a highway billboard. Glenn was one of our seed angels. Old school, ex-military logistics guy who invested not because he believed in the product, but because he believed in me. When we hit our first cash flow panic, he wired $250,000 without blinking and told me, "Don't screw it up or I'll haunt your dreams." He answered on the second ring. "Denise," he grunted. "Someone dying?" "Not yet," I said. "But someone's about to wish they had." 10 minutes later, he was in. The second call was to Lydia Cho. Lydia made her fortune building supply chain software so reliable Amazon tried to buy her twice. She still drives a 15-year-old Prius and once shut down a $140 million merger meeting because the other party used Comic Sans in their pitch deck. She has never once smiled at Alan. When I laid out what Derek was planning, the purge, the rebrand, the hostile dilution, she was quiet for a full minute. "Then he's trying to erase you," she said. "He thinks I'm invisible." "Good," she said. "Let him think that." The third was Robert Klein. Real estate baron, part-time pilot, full-time menace when crossed. He'd only invested because I'd helped him outmaneuver a competitor in a zoning lawsuit. He once told me, "You're not the kind of woman people see coming. That's your weapon." I sent him Derek's proposal. 5 minutes later, he replied with 2 words. "Use me." Within 24 hours, I had their signed statements. digital, time-stamped, legally binding. Each one pledged full support for any action I deemed necessary to preserve the integrity and continuity of original shareholder interests. Mitchell received the PDFs with a simple subject line, green light. Meanwhile, Derek was busy playing emperor. He started holding alignment lunches with junior execs, handing out branded notebooks like he was launching a startup inside our startup. Someone caught a snippet of his speech in the break room. We're going to look back on this as the pivot that made the company legendary. Once we clean house, the real money starts flowing. Clean house. Interesting choice of words from a man standing in mine. He also started referring to me openly now as Denise the dinosaur. He said it during a Friday happy hour. One of the data analysts messaged me. Analyst, he thinks you're dead weight. Me, perfect. He handed out slogans and promises. I stayed quiet, focused, surgical. I pulled every version of our bylaws and cross-checked the clauses. I made sure the founder clause was enforceable under current cap table conditions. I verified quorum rules, voting thresholds, override mechanisms. Every detail. No surprises. I also printed the original infrastructure contract, the one I brokered as Margaret Ellis. I highlighted the clause that tied our government revenue stream to non-transferable service agreements. If the board changed without disclosure, the contract voided. Derek's rebrand pitch would kill $28 million in annual revenue. I underlined that part in red ink. Then came the folder. The real one. Leather-bound, hand-stitched, heavy enough to hurt if you dropped it on a foot. Inside, the original founder equity agreements. The trust document linking me to the 60% stake. The board removal clause signed by Alan 6 years ago. The 3 investor endorsements. Financial statements showing the risk of Derek's plan. A notarized resolution to remove Alan as CEO and Derek as strategic advisor. And one last page. A confidential email from a state regulator confirming the infrastructure deal would be audited if Derek's proposed pivot went through. I slipped a paperclip on that one and labeled it nuclear option. I placed the folder in my briefcase, shut the latches, and for the first time in months I smiled. Not a polite social smile. Not a boardroom grin. A real one. The kind that says, I'm done watching. I'm done waiting. And now, you're mine. The summit was 3 days away. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. And the sharks? They were swimming right toward it with their mouths wide open. The ballroom smelled like money and desperation. It was a scent I'd grown to recognize over 2 decades in this industry, a mix of expensive cologne, fresh-cut lilies, and the distinct, metallic tang of anxiety sweating through high thread-count shirts. Crystalline wine glasses gleamed under chandeliers the size of small submarines, refracting light onto the waxed marble floors. Every chair was monogrammed. Every napkin was folded into some godforsaken lotus shape that probably cost a junior associate an ulcer to coordinate. The walls were lined with 12-foot banners screaming phrases like Next Horizon and Velocity of Innovation in bold, sans serif fonts. No one in the room knew what those actually meant, but it didn't matter. The visuals slapped. That's all Derek needed. The investor summit had officially begun. Waiters in white gloves floated around the perimeter with trays of champagne and acai tuna bites on seaweed crackers. A jazz quartet played near the bar, just loud enough to distract from the lack of actual revenue growth, but not loud enough to offend the delicate sensibilities of the venture capitalists. There were branded gift bags at every seat, heavy with swag that would end up in a landfill by Tuesday. And yes, Derek had included copies of his vision statement, printed on thick cardstock with embossed edges, looking for all the world like a wedding invitation to a funeral. I heard one investor whisper near the buffet, "Is this a shareholder meeting or a gala?" Alan was working the crowd, all charm and arm touches. You'd never guess he'd spent the last month dodging emails from half his board. He moved like a man who still believed his own reflection, flashing that practiced, photogenic smile. Every "so glad you made it" was perfectly timed. Every nod was rehearsed. But I knew him better than anyone. I saw the way his eyes darted around the room, searching the corners, scanning the exits. He was avoiding eye contact with the older faces in the room. He avoided mine entirely. Derek, meanwhile, had his own gravity. He floated in 10 minutes late, sleeves rolled up just enough to say I'm casual, but wearing a gold Rolex that caught every beam of light like it owed him rent. He laughed too loud, grinned too wide, and kissed the air near people's cheeks. When he passed the table where I sat, he didn't even pause. He didn't slow down. He walked right past me like I was part of the upholstery. Good. Let him think I'm furniture. Furniture is heavy when it falls on you. I sat in the back row, far away from the reserved placards at the front. No name card, no glossy folder, just me, my battered leather briefcase, and a glass of sparkling water I refused to touch. Around me, the pieces of my trap began to settle into place. Glenn Mallory was at the far end of the room, dressed like a retired detective on vacation, wrinkled linen jacket, no tie, eyes like steel traps. He caught my eye and gave the slightest nod, barely a twitch of his chin. Lydia Cho sat 2 tables over, scrolling through a tablet with a look of utter boredom. She didn't look up, but she angled the screen just enough for me to see the green, connected status of our secure chat. Robert showed up last, sipping a bourbon he had almost certainly smuggled in himself. He raised one eyebrow at me, a silent poker signal. All in. The lights dimmed, bathing the room in a cool, corporate blue. The jazz quartet faded out, replaced by a thumping, energetic bass track that sounded like the intro to a sports highlight reel. Alan took the stage first. He looked good in the spotlight, he always did. That was his gift. He could sell ice to a polar bear, provided someone else had cut the ice and packed the sled. Welcome, everyone, Alan beamed, his voice amplified to a rich baritone. We are so excited to share our vision for the next chapter of our journey. A chapter built on excellence, efficiency, and transformation. The applause was polite, hollow. The kind of clapping you hear at a golf tournament. But to truly understand where we are going, Alan continued, stepping aside, we need to look at the architecture of the future. I'd like to introduce the architect himself, our Chief Strategy Officer, Derek Vance. The screen behind him flashed an image of a mountaintop with a glowing sun, because apparently, success in Derek's world came with generic clip art. Derek bounded onto the stage like he was accepting a Grammy. He grabbed the microphone, pacing the stage, energized by the sound of his own voice. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, what you're about to hear isn't just a strategy. It's a revolution. It's a reawakening of what this company can be. Leaner. Sharper. Future-aligned. I counted 6 buzzwords in his first 30 seconds. He spoke in the cadence of a man trying to hypnotize his own ego. Every phrase was a soundbite designed for LinkedIn. He showed graphs without y-axes. He used words like scalable ecosystem evolution and stakeholder harmonization. One slide literally read, * disruption isn't coming. We are the disruption, *. He paused for effect. No one clapped. He didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. Then came the dagger. He clicked the remote, and a new slide appeared titled, Legacy Stakeholder Optimization. The room grew quiet. In 5 bulleted phrases, Derek outlined a plan to restructure the cap table, streamline passive equity, and future-proof the governance model. It was coded language, sophisticated gibberish, but anyone in that room who knew how to read a balance sheet knew exactly what it meant. Purge the founders. Dilute the original investors. Repackage the firm with a prettier face for Wall Street. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not anger that had burned off weeks ago. This was something colder. This was the feeling of a sniper exhaling before the shot. I looked to the side. Glenn's brow twitched. Lydia locked her tablet screen. Robert took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon. They were ready. Derek didn't see it. He was still up there, drunk on his own pitch, unaware that the stage he stood on was built with my money, my sweat, and my silence. We are going to look back on this, Derek said, spreading his arms wide, as the pivot that made this company legendary. Once we clean house, the real potential unlocks. Clean house, interesting choice of words from a man standing in mine. The Q&A portion began with the usual softball questions. Handshakes and empty compliments. Investors took turns asking about burn rates and hiring adjustments. Derek answered each one like he was auditioning for a TED Talk, using his hands to chop the air for emphasis. Every time someone brought up governance, he pivoted back to modernizing oversight. And then, the moment arrived. A junior VC in the second row, young guy, gelled hair, suit too tight, raised his hand. Regarding the implementation of these structural changes, he asked, checking his notes, who will be leading the transition of the legacy accounts? Derek smiled. It was a wolfish, condescending thing. He gestured toward Alan, then to himself. Leadership transition will be handled by executive consensus with advisory input, he said smoothly. He paused, scanning the room for approval, and then his eyes landed on the back of the room. On me. He couldn't help himself. The arrogance was too strong, the need to belittle too deep. He tilted his chin toward me and added, with a smirk that echoed through the microphone, and, of course, will rely on some administrative support for the paperwork. Like Alan's longtime assistant back there. She's great with calendar hygiene. It was a punchline. A throwaway joke to assert dominance. The room gave a collective shuffle of awkward limbs. Some people looked at their shoes. Others glanced at Alan, expecting him to defend me. Alan just chuckled, a breathless, nervous sound, but he laughed. He let the insult land. That sound broke the final thread. I didn't react. Not at first. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds, 4 or 5. Just long enough for the laughter to die and the air to turn stale. Then I rose. I didn't rush. I picked up my heavy leather briefcase with a calm deliberation. My heels didn't click on the marble, they thudded. Heavy. Final. I walked toward the double doors at the back of the room. Heads turned, expecting me to leave in shame. Instead, I stopped at the doors, turned around, and locked them. Click, the sound echoed in the sudden quiet. Then I turned back toward the stage and began to walk down the center aisle. I walked past the consultants with their expensive watches. I walked past the VCs with their open mouths. I walked past the executive row where the VP of HR was suddenly finding the pattern on the carpet fascinating. Derek stopped talking mid-sentence. His smirk faltered. Alan turned pale, his eyes widening as I approached. I reached the head of the table, right in front of the stage. I didn't look at the audience. I placed the briefcase on the table. I undid the brass latches. Asterisk snap. Snap, asterisk. I opened the lid and pulled out the leather-bound folder, the one labeled Summit. I looked at Derek. Then at Alan. Then I turned to face the room. Your presentation ends here, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back corners of the room without a microphone. Derek let out a nervous laugh. Excuse me? Denise, we're in the middle of. I said it ends here, I interrupted, my eyes locking onto his. Because I own 60% of this company. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a heartbreak. The silence was absolute. It was heavy, dense, suffocating. Alan turned gray. Not pale gray. Like his soul had just short-circuited. His jaw moved, but no sound came out. Derek blinked, his brain trying to process the data mismatch. Wait, what? That's impossible. Alan is the majority. Alan, I said, sliding the first document across the table, is a proxy. I laid the paper out. The Founder Equity Agreement. This is the original incorporation document. 60% of all voting shares are held by the Ellis Trust. I slid the second document. This is the blind trust disclosure, naming me, Denise Walker, as the sole beneficiary and executor of the Ellis Trust. I didn't stop. I kept pulling documents, laying them down like tarot cards of doom. This, I said, revealing a document with a blue signature, is the board removal clause, signed by Alan 6 years ago when he needed a bailout to make payroll. It grants the majority shareholder the right to override executive leadership in the event of gross strategic negligence. I looked at the screen behind Derek, at his ridiculous mountain clip art. I'd say this qualifies. Derek was sweating now. Visibly. A bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. This is dramatic, but you can't just walk in here and this, I cut him off, pulling out the document with the red ink, is the infrastructure contract. The one that accounts for 40% of our annual revenue. I held it up for the room to see. Page 12, Section 5. Any unapproved restructuring of executive governance voids this contract and triggers an immediate federal audit. I dropped the contract onto the pile. It hit with a heavy thwack. Derek's plan doesn't just dilute the founders, I said, turning to the investors. It bankrupts the company within 90 days. He didn't read the legacy contracts. He didn't do the due diligence. He just wanted a prettier org chart. A gasp went through the room. The junior VC who had asked the question looked like he was about to throw up. I turned to Alan. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the papers as if they were radioactive. You let him do this, I said quietly. You let him take my name off the website. You let him call me a dinosaur. You laughed when he called me your assistant. Denise, Alan whispered, his voice cracking. Please. We built this together. You can't. I built this, I corrected him. You just wore the suit. I reached into the folder for the final document. The board resolution. Effective immediately, I announced, my voice steady as steel, Board Resolution 9B is enacted. I looked at Glenn, Lydia, and Robert. They nodded in unison. Derek Vance, your consulting contract is terminated for cause. Your access to company systems was revoked 10 minutes ago. Security is waiting outside those doors to escort you off the premises. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He looked at Alan for help, but Alan was staring at the floor. And Alan, I said, looking at the man I had once treated like a brother. You are relieved of your duties as CEO. You will remain on the board as a silent observer, pending a formal review of your fiduciary breaches. Alan looked up at me, tears actually welling in his eyes. Denise, what are you doing? I closed the folder. I snapped the latches shut. I'm doing what I should have done 2 years ago, I said. I'm taking out the trash. I pointed to the door. Get out. Derek tried to muster some dignity. He straightened his jacket, grabbed his phone, and tried to glare at me. But it didn't work. He looked small. He looked cheap. He walked down the aisle, the silence following him like a shadow, until the doors opened and 2 large security guards stepped into his path. Alan didn't move. He just put his head in his hands. I stood there for a moment, letting the reality wash over the room. The velocity of innovation banners looked ridiculous now. The champagne was getting warm. The buzzwords had evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard truth of who actually held the power. I looked out at the sea of stunned faces, the consultants, the bankers, the employees who had ignored me in the hallway for months. The presentation is over, I said. The real work starts tomorrow. Meeting adjourned. I sat down at the head of the table. Lydia walked over and placed her hand on my shoulder. Glenn raised an imaginary glass from the back of the room. I took a sip of my sparkling water. It was cold. It was crisp. It tasted like victory. They thought I was the past. They thought I was a relic to be polished and put on a shelf. But they forgot the most important rule of building a skyscraper. You never, ever mess with the foundation. Because if the foundation moves, the whole house comes down. And I just brought the house down.